Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of Tudor Talk. I hope you are well wherever you are in the world. Of course, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah and I'm the Tudor Travel Guide. And every month we get together here live on YouTube, and I'm joined by a special guest. Oh, oh, sorry. Hold on a moment, guys. That's very strange. I know exactly what's happened there. Sorry about that. I had my YouTube playing in the background, so I was getting myself on loop then. Oh dear, technical difficulties. Anyway, we're back on track, I hope. So, yes, so here we are again, and welcome. Can see already that we have some old friends joining us. It's lovely to see you here. And also, of course, I'm sure there are some new folk who will be joining in, and you are most welcome too. So, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the session today. You may note that we will be here for up to an hour. We usually have about an hour's chat, and I will start off chatting to Michael and asking a couple of questions of my own. But I do hope that you've come along with questions for Michael about Hailes Abbey, about pilgrimage and monasticism. And feel free, of course, as we go along to post those in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on those. And I'll try and ask as many of those questions as I can throughout the course of an hour. So, with that, let's see who's arrived. Great. So we've got Janet, hello, and Anna's in soggy Wiltshire. It's really soggy outside my window too. It's very, very autumnal here, isn't it? Hello, Buttons H. Hello again. Lovely to see you. And we've got Marsha in Woodstock over in the USA. And hello, Cindy. Lovely to see you, Cindy. And Susan and Monica. Hi, Monica in Italy. I love Italy. It's one of my favourite holiday destinations. So how's the weather with you, Monica? Am I going to be really jealous? Are you going to tell me it's really nice and sunny and warm there still? But anyway, great for those of you who are joining us. Good. Okay. Well, today's guest was with us back in January. I can't believe where the year has gone. Obviously, there's a lot of water gone under the bridge since January. But I know that after that session, there were several of you who said, oh, please, can we have Michael back? Because he's so passionate and knowledgeable about his subject. Well, your wish is my command. And Michael joins us now. So why don't I just say, hello, Michael, welcome.
Hello, it's a real pleasure to be back. I enjoyed it as much as you did.
Oh, that's really lovely. That's really lovely. We had a good old chat, didn't we? All about the dissolution of the monasteries, and that was just fascinating. I think very, very enlightening and eye-opening. But for those of you who don't know you, Michael, I know you're senior properties historian at English Heritage, but maybe you could describe what that means and what is your real area of interest?
Well, as the name implied, I often think senior properties. What are those? Are those the especially old properties in the care of English Heritage? No, it's my place in a hierarchy. Properties historian. I undertake research on properties in the care of English Heritage, and my special area of interest are monasteries. And I'm a monastic historian and art historian. I'm very interested in the buildings and possessions of monasteries. In fact, all things monastic. I came to it in midlife, actually. I'd always been interested in monasteries since I was a little kid. Childhood trips to places like Kirkstall Abbey on the outskirts of Leeds, which I had a long-standing family relationship with, planted a seed that didn't really blossom until I reached the age of 41. It was my midlife crisis to pack in a secure, well-paid job and go off and do a PhD in the middle of an economic downturn. But it all came out good. I got the job at English Heritage. And my special area of interest are an order of monks called the Cistercians, to whom Hailes Abbey belonged, which we'll be talking about presently.
Mm, mm.
And my research interests at the moment have moved on very slightly. They're still related to monasteries, but I become very interested in the subject of sacred relics and pilgrimages at monasteries. And that's something I'll be looking forward to talking about as well. And I'm also a little bit of what would in centuries gone by I'd have been called an antiquarian, because
I love that
I
term.
take my interest in these things just a little bit further, and we'll be seeing how, I hope I'll have an opportunity to show you how, as the chat develops.
Oh, wonderful. Because I know you've got some things to show us today, and that's a first here on Tudor Talk. We've actually got some proper, like, bona fide medieval relics to look at, folks.
And
So,
yes, and so people need to set their what is it? They need to set their credulity to one their 21st century credulity. Just park that to an extent, but also you'll be seeing something which some of you might find a little bit gruesome. So
fantastic.
still your Tommies as well.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I love your story. I love the fact that you weren't always doing this, because for some reason I had this idea that anybody who was in the heritage sector must have been there right from the beginning. But the fact that you can change career and you can become a senior property historian at English Heritage, I love it. I just love it. So, look, we're going to talk. We're going to start talking about Hailes Abbey, which is a particular abbey in Gloucestershire. It's not far from Sudeley Castle. So, if people know Sudeley Castle, they may or may not have travelled the 3 or so miles away to Hailes Abbey. Now, tell me, why did we particularly want to land on Hailes Abbey, Michael?
Well, it's wonderful in so many respects, but it plays a very, very big role in the English Reformation. It becomes a very significant place in the religious disputes of the 1530s. But it is a fabulous place, and it's got a wonderful history. It goes back to the middle of the 13th century. It's one of the last but greatest Cistercian monasteries to be founded in England. It's founded by a prince, Earl Richard of Cornwall. He founds it as his burial church for his family. He richly endows it. But it takes on another significance because of a gift which his son gives to the monastery in 1270.
Oh, tell us more. What is this gift?
Well, it is one of the very best gifts that a monastery can receive. It receives a relic from Richard, and it isn't, sorry, from Edmund, from Earl Edmund, and it isn't just any relic. It is what is the most sacred of relics. It is what's believed to be a portion of the very blood that Christ shed whilst on the cross.
Wow, 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 wow. We are going to come back and dive into that. But before we go deeper into relics, I just wanted really to maybe just cover a little bit more about, I don't know, the history of the Abbey and, how Abbeys got set up. You talked about a founder there. Was that a common thing to happen? You've got a patron of an Abbey, and what part did they play in the importance of an abbey, the building of an abbey? Perhaps you could just give us some info on that.
Well, in the case of Hailes, they are enormously important. I mean, all monasteries have a founding patron, the higher the status of the patron, to an extent, the higher the status of the monastery, and how deep their pockets are as well. And Richard's pockets are very, very deep indeed, and he's very generous to his foundation at Hailes, and so too is Edmund. They spend lavishly on the foundation of the monastery, giving them the money to build the buildings. It's a cathedral-like church which is extended to make room for the relic. They bestow also, one of the greatest things a patron can do for a monastery is they bestow their bodies on Hailes for burial, and it's showing a real confidence in the efficacy of the monks' prayers for the salvation of their souls. It becomes a burial church of a cadet branch, a junior branch
Mhm.
of the English royal family. And in doing that, it's an imitation of a very important French royal monastery called Royaumont near France, which has been founded by King St. Louis as a burial church for junior members of his family. Now, Hailes is richly endowed, not just given the cash to build its buildings, but it's richly endowed with estates as well. Richard and Edmund, his son, act as very, very important advocates for Hailes as well at the royal court and beyond the papal court in Rome, with the ruling general chapter of the Cistercian order. So they're very, very good people to have on your side. The
And
problem is,
yeah.
we'll get onto it as well. I mean, should we talk more generally about the history of Hailes all the way through, or just about its early history?
Well, can we come back to what happened to it later? Because I
Yeah,
think that is
sure.
tied up with, the scandal. maybe I'd like to hear about that. Can you give us an idea of the pecking order? You said it was an important abbey. Where did it kind of fit in the pecking order of some of the other great Cistercian abbeys of England?
Well, it's a late foundation. If you think it's founded in 1246 or thereabouts, and there'd been the history of Cistercian settlement in England by that time goes back well over 120 years. Waverley in Surrey is the first one to be founded, but the ones that are probably more famous are the great Cistercian foundations in northern England, places like Revo Abbey,
Mm,
established in 1132. In terms of wealth, Hailes is, well, it's wealthy for a Cistercian monastery. It's got an income of around about £500 a year in the 16th century, which is pretty substantial. But that's half of the income of somewhere like Fountains. And its community is always around the 20 odd monks or so. It's,
mm,
it's in some sense it's a mid-ranking monastery. That's not to say it isn't very, very important
okay.
in terms of its religious history for various reasons, and the holy blood of Hailes is a very important one of those reasons. It sort of, to use a modern term, it punches above its weight.
Right. Yes, because when you go today, I mean, I've just been up north and I've been to Fountains Abbey, and you've got this massive, sprawling complex of ruins. And then you go to Hales, and it all looks quite diddy, really. I mean, I know there's probably a lot of the buildings have been lost, but it just looks, and maybe that's why it looks diddier, but it just looks less, less impactful.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, Fountains is remarkable, but don't forget that Fountains is one of the best preserved monastic remains anywhere in Europe, and also Fountains was an immensely rich, wealthy, and important monastery. Um, Hales, you do have to use your imagination when you're there to imagine what the church was like. But the east end of the church is modelled after Westminster Abbey.
Mm.
And it would have been utterly magnificent, the church at Hales. They build a fantastic glazed cloister in the 15th, early 16th century, ornamented with the coats of arms of its patrons. So I think that the heavily ruined state of Hales
Mm.
means that, well, it's easy to overlook its architectural importance and just how splendid it was. But if you do visit Hales, and I recommend people do, it's got a wonderful setting there, nestling um, in the
Mm.
foothills of the Cotswolds. Go into the museum there, and you can see some of its material remains, and that gives you a real sense of just how splendid it was. Go into the parish church next door, which was associated with the monastery. It was a kind of gatehouse chapel, although it wasn't at the gatehouse. It functioned like that, where lay people visiting the monastery could hear mass. And you can see in its east window some wonderful, wonderful late medieval stained glass removed from the monastery as its dissolution, later put back there, and some wall paintings, heraldic wall paintings and other wall paintings, which give you an idea of just how splendid the decor of Hailes Abbey itself would have been.
I have to agree with you and commend the museum. They've got amazing bosses, haven't they? I mean, they are absolutely magnificent, some of the best I've seen. So yes. Now we do have a question coming from Carrie. Carrie, I'm seeing your question. Um, what I want to do before we come to you, Carrie, is just go into a little bit about the relic and maybe a little bit about pilgrimage. And then I think, Carrie, your question about Henry VIII and the dissolution and royal connections, I think will be perfect for a little bit later. So I'm going to hold that and I'm going to come back to you. So tell us about this blood of Christ and why it was so important. What did that mean to the monastery and what happened as a result of this relic arriving?
Well, we have to unpack a little bit of that. That why does it get the relic in the first place? Why is Edmund, the son of the founder, in a position to acquire one of the very holiest of relics in Christendom? Well, it's because Richard comes closer than any Englishman ever to becoming Holy Roman Emperor, Emperor of the Germans. He becomes King of the Romans. He's crowned in Aachen as King of the Romans. That's
Oh.
heir apparent to become the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, he doesn't quite pull it off. Various dynastic political machinations in Germany means he can never quite push his claim. But whilst he's pursuing this claim, he's in Germany a lot, and so is his son. And whilst in Germany, his son acquires this portion of what's widely accepted as being a portion of the Holy Blood, and it has got a brilliant provenance as far as the medieval mind is concerned. It's said to have come from the imperial coronation regalia, the regalia used to crown the Holy Roman Emperor. And what's more, from a talisman, enclosed within a talisman that goes right back to the age of Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor. And through that, it has a provenance, a purported provenance going that takes it back. It's legend, it's called. And that's not a pejorative term. It doesn't mean, oh, fictional. It's what they called a legend. It's a story of it, the history of it. It goes right back to the time of the crucifixion. There's a story about how it was collected and preserved over the centuries. So to the medieval mind, it has got a brilliant provenance. And one thing about the Holy Blood of Hailes is that it is accepted. It might seem odd to people today, but it's widely accepted as being genuine. That cannot be said about the relic of the Holy Blood, which Henry III acquires for Westminster Abbey, which is a case of so many people go, what, mate? They saw you coming. People in the Middle Ages were quite credulous, and provenance, it might not be the same kind of provenance that we'd accept and stories that we would accept as being genuine. They really matter to people. The fact that the relic that Henry acquires doesn't really have a provenance before he gets it from the Patriarch of Constantinople, desperate for some cash. Well, where did that come from? People have had a high index of suspicion about it. That's not the case with the Holy Blood of Hailes. And it arrives at Hailes amid great ceremony on the 14th of September. That's a very significant day in terms of feast days. It's the Feast of the Holy Cross. So we've got a connection with the crucifixion being established then. Arrives in this great ceremony, is presented to the monastery by Edmund, and rapidly establishes its place as being very, very important to the identity of the monastery, to the liturgical life of the monastery, and the art and architecture of the monastery. They pull down the east end of the monastery and build this magnificent east end modelled on the recently built Westminster Abbey as a fitting setting, as these radiating chapels, bubble chapels going around it with a walkway. And that walkway tells you something as well, because they are expecting pilgrims, and pilgrims do flock to Hailes.
Yes. Now, this was quite important, wasn't it? And ultimately, this all got wrapped up in why the dissolution happened, I think, in terms of... I mean, I'd really like you to explain actually what shifted in the mindset, because at some point, obviously, Protestants came along and said, "What? This is a load of nonsense," along with other things. So there was obviously a shift, wasn't there, at some point?
Well, it's quite something. I mean, the veneration of relics and pilgrimages goes back to the days of the early church. From, I think it's St. Polycarp, 3rd century Christian martyr, is the first one, and we know of his mortal remains, his physical remains, being kept by the faithful and being venerated as relics, as having something sacred about them, and also conduits to work miracles, for holy things to happen via them. They're described as being finer than gold. And journeys to make relics are certainly from pilgrimages, visits to relics, and the hope of expressing your veneration for them, for the forgiveness of sins, for a miracle of some kind. They're happening from at least the 4th century. So they're a very, very important part in Christian belief, and actually remain so to this day. And and also I think a lot of secular people make pilgrimages of some sort, hoping for some change in their life by visiting people, or will collect or retain something because of its emotional significance. So I can, the number of years ago, someone paid an enormous sum of money for Kurt Cobain's stained cardigan, and in the Middle Ages that would have been a contact relic of this famous wonderful
Mm.
person.
Mm.
Or someone paid 60 odd quid for a coffee cup that Jeremy Corbyn had drunk out of. Well, that really is a contact relic, as it's got sort of his DNA on it, hasn't it? So don't get too snooty about these, about people in the past venerating relics. I think they speak to something that is innate in us as human beings. Now, most relics in the Middle Ages are utterly uncontroversial, believe it or not, and the stories about them are accepted as being genuine. That includes relics of the True Cross as well. They're portions, what
Mm.
are believed to be portions of the wood of the cross that Christ crucified on, discovered by Saint Helena in one of the first archaeological excavations ever conducted in Jerusalem in the 4th century. A lot of the relics of the True Cross probably do come from the wood that she discovered in Jerusalem, by the way. But relics of the Holy Blood are a little bit more theologically suspect. I think I could say that some people of unimpeachable Catholic orthodoxy, as early as the 13th century, if not earlier, are questioning whether or not relics of Christ's blood could exist. That because Christ goes bodily up to heaven,
Right.
assumed
Mm-hmm.
bodily up to heaven, and they argue that everything associated with him must have gone up at the same time. How could he leave things behind?
Mm-hmm.
There's this theological argument. Now, the veneration of relics in the West first gets seriously questioned in England in the 15th century by followers of an Oxford priest called John Wycliffe, called the Lollards. And there is Lollard writings and Lollard opposition to the Holy Blood of Hailes, and a number of people are tried in ecclesiastical courts and convicted of heresy for their opposition to the Holy Blood of Hailes, saying it's nothing more, and we'll get this saying coming back soon, nothing more than dog or drake's blood.
Mm.
Dismissing it, and also dismissing it in quite strong language, and about the feigned relic, and some of the language that's used about it is deliberately provocative and harsh. Now, in around about 1500, a pamphlet is printed for sale to pilgrims at Hailes, and it takes on these Lollard criticisms head on, as far as the monks are concerned and the believers are concerned, and it describes the sad fate of some Lollard priests. These are priests who have doubted the veracity of the Holy Blood, and what happens to them. And how they see the errors of their ways because of miracles performed by the Holy Blood of Hailes. And as late as the 1530s, miracles are indeed being attributed to the Holy Blood of Hailes. The great Tudor travel writer, chronicler, antiquarian John Leland writes, God daily shows his grace through the Holy Blood of Hailes. Miracles are being performed. It can even be able to raise the dead. Some of the miracles described to it are quite fantastic. My favourite one,
Mm.
it describes the kind of medieval equivalent of bad parents, and they're bakers who have set up their stall at Hailes for the pilgrimage season. And there was a pilgrimage season. People who know their
Was there?
Chaucer, yeah, know that it starts in basically goes with the good weather.
Wait, I was going to say it must be summer. It must be the summer month.
The prologue of the Canterbury Tales, starts, with April's here, isn't it? Hey, we got itchy feet, let's go on pilgrimage, and it goes through until later in the year. And I don't know precisely when it would have ended at Hailes, but there would have been a major feast at Hailes on the 14th of September, rather, the anniversary of the relic's arrival at Hailes. Feast of the Holy Cross. And anyway, these medieval bad parents have been they've had their stall outside Hailes all summer, and then they realise that they haven't been to venerate the relic, and they've loaded up the cart and put their kids in it, and the horse bolts and plunges into a quarry. It's like, parents leaving their kids in an overheated car,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
But the kids are miraculously spared from harm. I think so too, the horse, because they've done the right thing. They've been to venerate the relic. And pilgrims to the relic are said to have been, they're shown it by a special, a specially appointed senior monk, the altarius, in charge of the relic, the custodian of the relic. And nearby, there's a board telling of the relic's arrival at Hailes. And one very important thing about the Holy Blood of Hailes is that it will only reveal itself to you, i.e., you'll only be able to see the blood itself if you are in a state of grace. That is, that you have confessed your sins and received absolution and they've been forgiven. So people were said to visit Hailes to make sure that they'd been properly shriven from their sins, and also going on pilgrimage is a pious act itself. Now, have you ever discussed on the show Marjorie Kemp? She's a little bit before your time. She's the
No.
greatest. She's probably the most famous of all English medieval pilgrims. 15th century. She's from King's Lynn. She's famous for her pilgrimages and her boisterous weeping. And she travels all over the Europe on pilgrimages. She goes to another very important shrine of the Holy Blood at Wilsnack in eastern Germany. But on her way back from the shrine of St. James at Santiago de Compostela in northern Spain in the early 15th century, on the way back to Lynn, King's Lynn, or Bishop's Lynn as it was then called in Norfolk, she drops off at Hailes. On an encounter in the relic of the Holy Blood, she is overcome by a fit of boisterous weeping. And the monks are quite curious about her, and they do something which you shouldn't really do. They invite a woman into the claustral nucleus to discuss further with them. And some of them are quite like, it's sort of, oh my God, we've got one here today. And other ones are actually, quite impressed by her piety. And even more impressed after she tells off a couple of the monks for their swearing and their bad behavior. But I just think that, I've already mentioned Geoffrey Chaucer. The importance of the Holy Blood of Hailes is shown by the fact that he's mentioned in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, by God's precious heart and by his nails and by the blood of Christ that is at Hailes.
Wow. So it's a really famous relic.
And it is an A-League relic. It really is. It is, okay, it's not quite the relic, it's not quite Becket's relic at Canterbury, although in 1400, there's some satellites of Satan break into Hailes Abbey and rob the shrine of £100 worth of riches. And it's described at that time as being second only to Thomas Becket in Canterbury.
Okay, well, that's great. So we have confirmation of the fact. Now, I think this is a time to actually see a relic. Can you share a relic with us? What is it? Tell us about, you've told us about the different types of relics, but what have you got there?
There are relics of all kinds. Now, the relics range from being the whole body of a saint, and which you can still see today. If people go to Westminster Cathedral, the Roman Catholic Cathedral in central London, you can see the enshrined body of an English 17th century Catholic martyr, St. John Southwell, killed during the Commonwealth and Protectorate. And his body was recovered, sewn back together after being hung, drawn, and quartered, is enshrined in Westminster Cathedral. And then bits of saints as well. Saints' bodies would get broken up and their relics disseminated. And then bits of their clothing. And then also things, you had some things called contact relics. And they're basically, something that's been touched to a relic of the saint or to a holy place. And actually, the bits of the ground where the crucifixion took place, or where the nativity took place, or where St. Michael appeared on Mount Gargano, they could become relics as well. The relic I'm going to show you is actually a bit of a saint. Now, first of all, we know that it's going to be something very precious because of the container it's in. If I hold that up there, you can see that this
Yeah.
is silver gilt. So it's already, and it's a precious metal container. And you might be able to pick out there's lettering around there and a central image. I'm just trying to rotate
What does
it.
the lettering say?
It says Agnus Dei miserere me. That's Lamb of God, have mercy on me. And I'm just trying to get it the right way up. I think that's right. Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. And you can see there in the middle the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of
Lamb
God.
of God.
Now,
Yeah.
this was made in around about 1450 to
Wow.
1500. And it was made as a pendant to contain a little wax wafer, um, a pendant of the Agnus Dei, would have been sent, blessed by the Pope, sent out from Rome, but it's been transformed at some point to contain something else, something even more precious than something blessed by the Pope. And I'm going to turn it around. Now, people need to like steel themselves here. If you have a nervous disposition, steel yourself. It's coming, it's coming. There we go. And can you see there's
I,
something in there?
yeah, I can see it. It's a bit difficult because the light's reflecting, but
Oh,
yeah.
I'll put that down.
Oh
Oh
no,
no,
we
there's
can't.
not enough
No,
light now.
no. It's
Oh
better to
dear.
use the light. I'd move it the other way, closer and up a bit. No,
Oh,
up.
oh, there we are. It's me. Well, I can try to position myself on the screen. I had it right, didn't
That's
I?
it. That's it.
There
You've
you
got it.
go.
You've got it. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it looks a bit a tooth like. Is that right?
You got it in one. You got it. It's a tooth, and across it is a little piece of vellum. That's a little piece of parchment that's been tied to it, and you can just faintly make out some writing on it. And unfortunately, it's now illegible. You can't see who is now. That was called, that little piece of parchment is called a titulus, and it would have identified which saint's relic that was. And I've worked a lot with relic inventories and things like that. It would have said, the tooth of Saint such and such, martyr, or confessor, or something like that. Sorry,
Thank
I'm
you.
moving it around. I'm the wrong
Yeah,
way, aren't I? There we are.
yeah. The right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I've
I
gone too
think.
far. There
Yeah.
you are. And now it's interesting, isn't it? This is a form of a pendant. This would have been worn by somebody in the belief that the relic would have conferred some kind of spiritual and physical protection on
Right.
them.
And would
People
would
have personal relic collections.
uh,
Most of the relics were kept in great ecclesiastical institutions. About 18 months ago, I actually it received coverage in the major media. There was even a leader column about it in a leader comment about it in the Times, about an inventory of saints' relics I identified from Battle Abbey, 150 odd relics, and listing the relics of various saints, and it mentioned tooth relics of several of them. And then, I'm aware of several of these very, very similar ones to this surviving. The treasury of Basel Cathedral contained a number of them, very, very similar indeed to this one I'm showing you here.
that's wonderful. I
So
mean,
there we are. There's a genuine relic.
a genuine 1450s. Wow, ladies and gentlemen,
And
that's so
we don't know
exciting.
whose it is. This is,
Yeah.
it's intriguing. And
Yes.
that would happen even in the Middle Ages. And I have seen relic inventories, and it'll say, the pendant containing so this is how would they have described this? They would have said the pendant decorated with the lamb of our Lord, um, silver, and they'd say something about how wonderful the container was, wonderfully wrought of silver or gilt, and then it would have said containing the relic of a saint, the identity of which is known only unto God. The relic would still be potent, could still work its magic if you believed in it, even if you the saint to whom it belonged. And who knows, a miracle might be performed, but the saint would reveal him or herself.
And so would people of all strata of society had access to that kind of thing, or would that have belonged to somebody who was relatively wealthy?
Well, I just think the material tells you
It
something,
would
doesn't
be
it?
wealthy. But could you
You
get, were there kind of lower social class versions of that?
well, there are indeed, because, I mentioned contact relics, didn't I? And, when you went on pilgrimage or when you, visited a holy site, you could either, like, we know of people doing this, like chipping away bits of the building or bits of the stone
Right.
or filling a little, vial full of earth because a holy place made there. But there were also pilgrim souvenirs which you could buy, and they came in all shapes and forms. And I'm going to show you one of those now. Now, this is base metal, even though it looks like it's made of something very precious, but
Mhm.
it's actually just a copper alloy. And you can see there is a central rose, isn't there? And two figures,
Yes.
two kneeling figures.
Just about see
Um,
that. It's a little blurry, but I can just about see that.
yeah,
Yeah, definitely
and
see
in
this
the
too.
middle there is a vase with a
Mm.
flower in it, which is a lily. Now, the kneeling figure on the right of the screen is the Virgin Mary, and the one on the left is the Archangel Gabriel. And this is a pilgrim badge from the Shrine of the Virgin at Walsingham.
Wow.
Dates were around about 1500. We know of Henry VIII actually visiting Walsingham
Mm.
himself. You
Mm.
know, he
And
venerated
Catherine
the
of
holy.
Aragon went as well, didn't she?
Indeed,
Yeah.
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 You know, and this is from around about that time, very early 16th century.
Yeah, wow.
We know that people would touch these badges to the shrine of a saint
Ah,
in the hope that it would carry away some of the holiness
yes.
associated with the site. And pilgrims to Hailes, we don't have a pilgrim badge for Hailes. Doesn't mean that there wasn't one. It could just mean that it just hasn't survived. For
Yeah.
instance, William of York, the great saint. Well, was he a great saint? William, 12th century Archbishop of York, becomes the great saint of York Minster. Attracted pilgrims. Marjorie Kemp actually went to York Minster to venerate him. Only one badge from the pilgrimage of St. William of York survives. Now, there must be innumerable sites
Mm.
for which not a single badge survives. Another thing you would do when you went to these sites as well, pilgrimage sites, you'd get some holy water, and you'd carry that away in little lead ampullae like
Oh,
this. And
fantastic.
um,
What's that date to? Do you know? Can you?
this is probably 14th or 15th century. A little
Uh-huh.
bit difficult today. It's got nothing on it to identify the shrine.
Mm.
Now, these are in quite large numbers, and the practice came of, like, but you'd hang them around your neck to show you'd been on pilgrimage. Badges like that you would sometimes sew onto your hat,
Yeah.
and then when you got back, for instance, like ampullae from Becket Shrine, the holy water from Becket Shrine. Well, that was diluted Becket's blood,
Ah,
you know,
right.
and it was believed to have sacred properties, and people would drink Becket's blood, the ampullae from the Canterbury water or Becket's blood
Yes.
water, in the hope of performing a miraculous cure. And
Mm.
we also know of these things being buried in fields. Loads of these survive. They're founded by metal detectorists. Go to the Portable Antiquities Scheme website, and there's innumerable ones of these. And it seems to be that they were buried into fields in a way of, like, hope of sort of sacred blessing for the fields, that you're going to have a good crop.
Okay,
They
yeah.
may well have been sold not just at the shrines themselves, but by wandering peddlers. There were relic peddlers, no two ways about it. From late antiquity onwards, people selling relics. And people were credulous. The people knew there were fake relics out there.
Mm.
And like a good painting today, people who watch Fake or Fortune will know, well, what can you tell us about the provenance?
Yeah. Yeah.
Gaps in the
Provenance is
provenance
everything.
gaps in the provenance of a relic didn't go down very well at all. You had to be able to tell a good story about where the provenance of the relic was.
Lovely. I'm just gonna read Marsha's comment. She's just saying, as you were chatting, when I attended Catholic school in the 1960s, we learned that all Catholic church altars needed to have a relic in the altar
They do
stone in order
indeed,
to be
yeah.
properly consecrated.
They do. That has been the case since, oh gosh, I think the 7th or 8th century, perhaps even before.
Well, there
You
you
know,
go.
so every single altar contains a relic, and also I think bishops' rings. A lot of Catholic bishops' rings will contain a relic as well. That was another common thing, to have a relic in your
In
wear
the
a
ring.
relic in a ring.
So we've got the relic at Hailes, and the pilgrimage market opens up. So this is a very lucrative industry as well, is it not, for
It's
the
really
abbeys?
interesting, actually. Is that pilgrimage is often thought of in economic terms, and you've got a lot of
Uh-huh.
people traveling a long way. And when people visit shrines, they do indeed make offerings to them, or what's called, to use a medieval term, or the nerdy term, an oblation to the shrine and offering. And there's some brilliant stories of how people being nobles visiting a shrine, being persuaded to take off their rings and offer it. And shrines would be draped in these offerings as well. When I was talking about, the riches stolen from the blood of Hailes, it was the offerings, the precious metal offerings being draped around it as signs of piety. And people would make cash offerings to a shrine as well, a way of showing their piety and a way also of hoping that the relic would work good for them. Now, there's something to that argument, and it is good for a monastery or a major church to have a miracle working relic. It's got a bit of novelty to attach to it, so people come. But caring for pilgrims, now monasteries have an obligation of hospitality to anybody who knocks on their door, basically. And
Mm.
the level of hospitality you receive is very much determined by your social status. If you're quite grand, you'll be put up in the posh guest house, and you get fodder for your horse and things like that. You give them food appropriate for your status. Lower down the social scale, it's in the almonry kind of thing, or next to the door, and be glad with your bowl of gruel kind of thing.
Hmm.
But you're given a bed for the night and some food. Pilgrims are an expensive group to look after. They really are. If you've got a lot of pilgrims, there's a lot of people to feed, and you've got to do it for free in the hope that you get something back. And, just quite how much some places made from pilgrims is open to question. What it might be is that they attract the big cash donations, that, Richard and Edmund have made these wonderful donations of cash to Hailes. And it's like, is it like the higher up the social scale where it can make the big difference? I'm not negating the significance of the small offerings made. I mean, for
Mm.
instance, that at the time of its suppression, it's still receiving, Hailes is still receiving £10 a year in offerings to the shrine. And if you think that some poor nunneries don't have an income much beyond £10 to £20 a year, and it's about £10 a year is about the income of a well-paid parish priest. So, it's a
Yeah.
not inconsiderable sum, but it's not the kinds of mega bucks that you need to rebuild your monastery and things like that. It had been getting those in the past, and we know of Hailes received several papal privileges, enabling it to bestow spiritual privileges on pilgrims, and it's mentioned so it can rebuild the tower or something like that at the church. So there is a cash element to
Mm.
it, but don't take it too far. It's not that, it's not, it is monetarized to some extent, but I don't think it's to the extent that some people believe it has been in the past.
But is that not, has that not come about because of the whole dissolution story, and the story that Cromwell and his men kind of wrapped around the debauchery and the lack of moral code, and that was supposedly going on in these religious institutions that needed reform, and these poor
Mm.
people were, they were fleecing the ordinary people for money around these relics, which held no real power. Is that where we're getting this narrative from? Is that the hangover from that?
And partly, and it's also that people were saying that beforehand as well. And one of the biggest critics of relics was Erasmus. The great thinker, early 16th century thinker. He was pretty appalled by veneration of relics. So there is some of it is Tudor propaganda, is black propaganda
Mm.
against them. There was some sort of, certainly with the, as I said, the blood relics were slightly more theologically suspect, and the churchmen themselves could get a little bit, ooh,
Well,
should people
well,
really be doing that?
could we talk about then? Could we go back to what happened at Hailes, particularly in
Yeah,
1535, and what unravelled there? Because I remember talking about in one of my posts online about the duck's blood scandal, and somebody said, "Who's what's that?
yeah.
What's that? What's that?" So maybe you could tell us about those events, and we can come into kind of what happened with the dissolution and what happened towards the end of the Abbey's life.
Well, first of all, I think an important point to make is that the Holy Blood of Hailes remains very popular, and it attracts pilgrims and patronage from across the social scale, from the Duke of Buckingham, the Earl of Northumberland, through to humble pilgrims. And it's in 1533 Hugh Latimer who becomes quite a hotter sort of Protestant, or an evangelical is the now preferred to. He bitterly complains about the flocks of pilgrims going past his vicarage on their way to Hailes. So there's an indication there it's still quite popular. It's still attracting
Mm.
pilgrims. And it really gets up the nose of reformers. It's a veneration of relics, and also I wonder, is it targeted as well? Because there's already that slight fault line in it that it can't command 100%, theological legitimacy. There's all, the Dominicans especially had been quite down on blood relics, but there's been this lingering suspicion about blood relics, not present in most people's consciousness, but it's got a chink in its armor, I wonder. And I think it gets targeted, and the targeting of it could well indeed have started with Anne Boleyn herself.
Yes. Yes,
She
tell us what
is
happened.
well, she's making a progress through the West Country. This is a year before her fall, 1535, and it's before the attack on the monasteries has really started. And
Mm.
there's, it's the Reformation is still gathering pace, and she's a very important driver of it. And she learns of this feigned relic and the superstitious nature of it, and she sends her chaplains there to inquire about it when she's at nearby Winchcombe. That's the story anyway, and I think it's probably right, to be honest.
Mm.
And I would just wonder what the Abbot of Hailes felt like when Anne Boleyn's chaplains come along and start nosing around about their famous relic. Now, the Abbot of Hailes is a chap called Stephen Sagar, or Worley, his name in religion. He grew up in Worley in Lancashire, where he was a monk, and comes down to Hailes as abbot. And he's been described by one modern scholar as a Tudor chameleon. That he changes
Wow.
his color with the vicissitudes of religion, but he does seem to be humanistically minded to some extent. And he establishes quite a good relationship with Thomas Cromwell, and he becomes a royal chaplain. He's present a little bit later on at the baptism of Prince Edward, and he has these enemies, though. He's called the Bloody Abbot because of the holy blood by some of the more evangelical members of Henry's court.
Mm.
So that's an early sign. And then Thomas Cromwell sends a preacher to the monastery called Anthony Saunders, who's to preach the true word of Christ to the brethren, and they won't have any of it,
I
And
can
um,
imagine.
and the abbot, in actual fact, appoints an Oxford graduate who's called a great Duns man in this correspondence to Cromwell, i.e., a follower of Duns Scotus.
Mm.
Traditional Catholic theology, been called a Duns man. It's the origin of our word dunce.
Oh, is
you know,
it?
pejorative. Yeah.
Nice
Basically,
one.
so basically the monks have got no intention of listening to the lectures of Anthony Saunders. They'll listen to the Oxford graduate giving them traditional Catholic
Mm.
theology.
Mm.
And but that increasingly the smaller monasteries are coming down. Sagar's doing his best to ingratiate himself with Cromwell. but the Holy Blood of Hailes is becoming more and more vulnerable, especially when they start to attack the veneration of relics and pilgrimage to relics, and it becomes a evangelical cause célèbre
Ah,
that Latimer, who has been elevated to the episcopal bench, um, along with a member of the Tracy family. You mentioned Sudeley Castle, and they are early evangelicals. They go off to Hailes to inquire about the relic, where they denounce it in front of local people. They remove it from its reliquary container, and they denounce it as an unctuous gum
right.
clarified with saffron, you know, and they take it in a sealed box off to London, where it's then denounced shortly afterwards in a fiery sermon by the Bishop of Rochester at St. Paul's Cross. And he says it is nothing more than duck's blood. Now, I think he's picking up on something that had been said about it
Mm.
before. Now, the Abbot of Hailes and the monks are, oh, I didn't know anything about this. And the Altarius, the guy charged with care for the abbot of the relics, said, "No, of course not. It's nothing of the sort." And then they blacken his name. They say basically he's been consorting with local women for ages. He's theologically suspect. But
Oh,
they deliberately discredit the blood of Hailes, and also another very important relic called the Rood of Grace at Oxley. It's another Cistercian monastery. This one time it's an animated sculpture of Christ, and they say this is another feigned relic as well, and they burned that at Paul's Cross. So they discredited these two major relics, and what happens? The sky doesn't fall in. So that they've desecrated these relics, but nothing really bad has happened.
yeah, right. And so we see the end. So, of course, the Reformation saw pretty much the end of the veneration of relics that had been seen through the medieval period. But as you point out, they did survive, and also pilgrimages survived as well. And I really just wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Actually, first of all, have you ever been on pilgrimage? I'm really interested to know. Have you ever
I've
walked any of
never
the paths?
No, I mean, it's interesting. Couple of years, 3 years ago now, I was in Burgos with my partner, and we Burgos is on the Camino of Santiago, the route to
Ah,
St James, and we encountered a lot of pilgrims. And nearby in Burgos, there's got a fantastic cathedral, but it's also got some great monasteries as well. And I was motivated. I didn't really think about doing that, about walking at least part of the Camino. And similarly, it was this earlier this year, thinking about holidays, about walking the pilgrimage from London to Canterbury. You know,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I have encountered pilgrims about 7 years ago. I mean, gosh, 7 years ago, it was 2014, that one Aachen, the great imperial city of Aachen, that's where Earl Richard was crowned King of the Romans, and where you can still see a casket with his coat of arms on it from his coronation. There's an amazing collection of relics, and I went there on a study trip, and it actually coincided with the pilgrimage to see these relics. And this ring is now a contact relic, I
Ah,
think, of the
brilliant.
swaddling clothes of Christ. It was touched to the
Fantastic.
casket containing Christ's swaddling clothes,
That's brilliant.
and it's still, of course, it doesn't die. It continues in Catholic Europe,
Mm.
and the veneration of relics comes back under the Catholic Queen Mary. There's some shrines are restored, especially that of the Confessor. English Catholics during the years of persecution keep some relics saved from at the time of the Reformation. Some of them are subsequently lost because they're walled up in manor houses, and they create new relics of English Catholics who died for their faith.
Yes.
And there's been a great revival. To an extent, it's a secular revival of people doing pilgrimages now. More people than ever now walk the Camino de Santiago, and then, other long distance pilgrimages, the one to the Rome, for instance, and then to an extent as well, a medieval tradition of having parish pilgrimages has been revived as well, of just walking from one parish church to another, where the local image of the Virgin, for instance, would have been the focus of veneration. So I think it's sort of speaking to an inner spiritual side of us.
Yeah, because I think there is I think people are connected spiritually, of course, still. And I know myself, I was actually planning on doing the pilgrim walk from Winchester
Yeah.
through to Canterbury just before COVID hit, and that completely scuppered that. But I love that idea. Yes, so still alive and well despite everything. But I think we
Yeah.
should I recognize the time. We've only got 5 minutes left. Maybe you could just literally, in a few sentences, so that we complete our picture of Hailes, just tell us what happened to it after the dissolution.
Well, I mean, Sagar is hoping that his monastery will be turned into what's called a college of secular canons. Basically, it stops being a monastic foundation, but it continues as a major church. And, they still sing souls, masses at this time for the salvation of Earl Richard. It's probably they're hoping because it's a royal foundation, it'll hang on.
Mm,
It doesn't come to pass. The monastery is dissolved. I think it's on Christmas Eve, 1539.
mm.
Monks cast out with pensions. Sagar does very, very well for himself. He gets a very, very generous pension.
He's got
Now,
his bread. He's got his bread buttered on the right
yeah, but
side,
he
doesn't
retains very conservative religious opinions as well.
he? Uh-huh.
He's one of these people, as I said, he's bending with the wind. And the
Hmm.
monks work with pensions. Now, but Hailes is pillaged after it's dissolved, after the commissioners have finished there. The local populace descend upon it and really, really pillage the monastery, and to such an extent that a special court of inquiry is convened in 1542 to find out what's been going on. Now, Dermot McCulloch, who is one of my heroes, and I would love to be a historian of his statue. He says that people this is because people hated Hailes, and I just don't agree. And he says it's as a consequence of the discrediting of the relic. Basically, I think it's because there was all this stuff going for free, and you know what? I'm going to go in there and I'll help myself to that. And
Yeah.
one of the things that persuades me is because it crosses confessional divides. The people helping themselves to the stuff of Hailes are, fierce evangelicals, yes, through to upholders of Catholic orthodoxy, and it's just stuff,
There's
and you'd
free
be,
stuff.
it's a, and also it's easy to forget just how important just having a metal cooking pot could be to somebody who has virtually nothing. You
Yeah.
know, oh, or a parish priest. You know what? I can reglaze my east window. Oh my word! Look at this. It's all going for free. I'm going to have it. You
Mm,
know. So I
mm.
think we should moderate arguments like that. But I do think that the very, very ruinous condition of Hales, it's just foundation levels of the
Yeah.
church, and
Yeah.
I think that's deliberate.
Right.
Let's erase this from the
Mhm,
landscape.
mm.
It passes through the West Range becomes a manor house. The former abbot's house becomes a manor house. It gradually goes down in social status. You can see some wonderful 17th century prints, and it's still standing. Along with bits of the
Mm.
East Range as well. But by the 18th century, that too is in ruins, and it just decays. And it's given to the National Trust, and it's placed in the guardianship of the state. That's why English Heritage looks after it, who gradually uncovered the ruins. It's got something called soft capping on it to protect them from the elements. So they
Right.
look like they're
Yes.
overgrown. It's
Yeah.
deliberate, I assure you. But it gives you a sense of the scale of it, and as a beautiful setting. And also, it's one of these, it's quite mournful if you think this great medieval monastery, which people put their spiritual salvation, their hopes of spiritual salvation, and also if you think for the things that motivated people to go on pilgrimage, people suffering from those awful illnesses, and is this going to be a cure? You know, And it's very moving when you think about it along those lines. And also, even not, it's like, we were supposed to throw up our hands in horror at the Bawdy Tales, the Canterbury Tales, and things like that. But my word, gosh, I don't begrudge anybody a break from the routine, and knows what their motive would have been when they got there. And then this dramatic, the king of the Romans, the bones of the king of the Romans, members of the Earl Richard and his wife Sancha, they were the Megs and Harry of their generation. They were incredibly glamorous. That this was a sepulchre of royalty, and it was a very important place.
On that point, I promised Carrie I would ask her question,
Oh, yes.
which is kind of connected to what you were just saying. And Carrie said, if the monasteries were founded by royal personages, how was that connection handled when Henry VIII wanted to dissolve them?
It's interesting. I mean, Reading Abbey, king buried there, virtually nothing remains of it. Body lost, Henry I's body lost. It doesn't seem, in most cases, to have made much of a difference at all, although it may well be one of the reasons why Peterborough Abbey becomes Peterborough Cathedral, because he couldn't quite bear to see, Catherine of Aragon had recently been buried there, to see that reduced to ruins, or to have to exhume her body and translate it to a more fitting setting. We wonder if there was something to do there. It just doesn't seem to have made any difference. Hey, it's centuries ago, and they were what? Who? Vaguely heard of them. Yeah. Oh, it's got that famed relic. How much is the lead worth? Oh, yeah. Go on.
I think we can turn a blind eye and just,
Yeah, exactly. But what the dramatic events played out there in the 1530s.
Do you know, Michael, I can't believe an hour's flown by.
I know.
Where has the time gone? I hope we managed to touch on all the relevant bits. I'm sure we could have talked for a lot longer. I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming back again and shedding even more light onto the English monasticism. Thank you so much.
It was a joy, a real joy.
And so I hope we'll see you again at some other point. And I just want to say thank you for those of you. There have been people saying hello all the way through. And Alan was saying the parish church museum, this is at Hailes, do give a great impression. But for me, the outstanding audio guide really brought this site to life. I haven't listened to the audio guide on that, but fantastic, brilliant. That's a good endorsement, isn't it? So that's wonderful.
Oh, there's a guidebook written by
a guidebook. Excellent. And you wrote that, didn't you? You wrote that, Michael, didn't you?
I did. This is by me. Yeah.
So you can pick up, if you want to know more about Hailes Abbey, you can, I'm sure, pick up a copy of that. And yes, thank you, Marsha, saying thank you, and Janice saying great chat. Thanks to you both. Cindy, fantastic. Thank you, Michael and Sarah. And I'm sure as we wrap up this chat, we'll get a few more comments like that. But for now, I'm going to say thank you very much. And I'll see you again shortly, Michael.
I hope so. It was a real pleasure.
Take care.
Bye.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of this month's Tudor Talk. Just to say, of course, I'll be back next month. In fact, when we have Tracy Borman joining us again. Now, like Michael, Tracy was with us early in the year, but some of you may know, if you were tuning into Clubhouse, that Tracy has a new book coming out about royalty. It covers all of English royalty, so it's going to be really interesting to find out some of the stories that have really landed with Tracy as she has been writing that book. So she's going to be coming along in early November. Again, first Saturday in the month, I think, and you'll be able to join us then. And thank you so much, Debbie, for just giving me a super sticker to say thank you very much. I much appreciate it. And for those of you who are a part of my membership program on YouTube, I do have a membership program. So if you want to support my work here on YouTube, and I would be very grateful, you just have to go to my homepage and you should see a little join button. Or there is also, I think, a link in the description below if you'd like to look into what becoming a member entails. But I'd like to give a big thank you to any of my members who are here today and who are supporting my work. And the only other thing I just wanted to tell you about, because this will be the only time for me to do this month, is that I have just opened booking for my autumn virtual summit. I have an annual summit, and this year I'm going to be doing Power to Peasantry, the Art of Being a Woman in Tudor England. So if you love kind of social history, female history, then we've got some great speakers across the weekend, the 23rd and 24th of October. We have Professor Susanna Lipscomb, who's going to be spearheading that summit, and I have 5 pre-recorded videos to share with you over the weekend, along with some musical entertainment from Jessie Tomsko, who has written a musical called Berlin, and which I totally fell in love with this year. Now, if you want to sign up for that summit, as I say, booking is now open. If you head over to the Tudor Travel Guide, www.thetudortravelguide.com, you should be able to see some links on the homepage. If not, once this live chat has finished, I'll actually put a link in the description below, so you'll be able to, if you can't find it on the homepage, if you want to come back here, it will remain on YouTube. You can come back and watch this live chat again, or you can check out that link. Okay, I think I've kept you, ladies and gentlemen, long enough. So thank you wherever you are in the world, and I will see you around in the Tudor sphere very shortly. Okay, bye for now.